Imagine that. Imagine that. You will remember, sisters and brothers, that we are caught in the throes of a conversation in which we are looking at the character and the nature of our ancestors who were the first ones to be released from slavery, asking a set of questions. Chief among them is, what was it about them that allowed them to move from nothing to creating community? What was it about them that allowed them to move from slavery to freedom in such a manner that they were able to create a world that makes it possible for us to enjoy what we have today? You remember the first time we talked about this, we discovered that it was about self-determination. That is, you can't tell me what the Lord can't do for me. I just had to say it like I felt it. In the second instance, sisters and brothers, we talked about self-awareness. That is, I know who I am and I know whose I am, and therefore I will not be defined by the false images that the world presents of me. Are we still together? Well, today I want to present yet another set of characteristics, another part of what I believe was their nature, and that is the ability to act creatively and innovatively. I'll say that for you again, the ability to act creatively and innovatively. Chapter 2, and what we witness, sisters and brothers, is this idea of the imagination of God that flows through men and women, that allows us to see God do the miraculous in a manner that verse 12 of our text says amazed the people. To be sure, you and I must be careful to remember that the word asserts that we are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God. That is, when God decided to make humankind that eventually became you and I, He decided to give us a portion of His imagination. Please, whatever you do, do not discount the power of the imagination of God. You do understand that Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3 begin by telling us just how powerful the imagination of God really is. You do remember that the word says, when there was nothing, God began to think, and when God thought, God spoke, and when God spoke, things began to happen, and it all came from the imagination of God. Now, I've explained it this way before, but let me please give you a refresher course, if you will. If God is so imaginative, and if God has given us a portion of His imagination, I wonder, what is it about you and I that when we become saved, we put our imagination on the shelf. We lay it aside. Consider, if you will, and remember, if you will, the way that you used your imagination when you were a child. Imagination was alive. Imagination was popping. It seemed like at every turn you were looking at something and seeing it differently than perhaps everybody around you. I know I'm not the only one that was not always able to get to the baseball diamond, and therefore we learned how to take the old stuff in the neighborhood, put a stick here and put a stick there, take an old tennis ball, saw off an old broomstick, and you couldn't tell us we were not playing in Yankee Stadium or in Dodger Stadium. It's called imagination. I know I'm not the only one that played the game as we were riding along or as we were walking along when that car came along that was bad, that was the latest, greatest thing out there. Before your friends could say it, you claimed it for your own and said, that's my... It's called imagination. When we were children, sisters and brothers, would lie on the ground. You remember children used to lie in the grass. They actually went outside. You all remember that? Used to lie in the grass and stare up at the sky try and imagine what life could be, what kind of house I'm going to have, what kind of car I'm going to drive, where I'm going to live, what I'm going to do. It's called imagination. But life comes our way, sisters and brothers, and mortgages and responsibilities. And the next thing you know, we allow life to steal our ability to use our imagination. Well, the Lord sent me to Elm Grove this morning to stir up in you the gift of imagination. If God can use his to make ways where previously there was no way, then certainly the gift that the gift of grace that God has given to us, that's called imagination, is still real and relevant for us today. Can I keep going? I have discovered, sisters and brothers, you really think about it, that sometimes it takes real imagination. Consider, if you will, those who were slaves one day and freed persons the next day. It must have taken imagination. It must have taken imagination to look up at the stars at night to determine what direction to take, to move into places, into safe spaces, and into places called real freedom, because you do know that the Emancipation Proclamation was not received by those who were in the dominant culture, and they fought against our ancestors at every turn. It must have taken imagination, sisters and brothers, to look at the flow of the river, to see how the river was flowing, to determine which way to go. It must have taken imagination. If you look at how the ability to take what other people threw away and turn it into a treasure, it must have taken imagination, sisters and brothers, to take the scraps off of somebody else's table and turn it into a delicacy at your own table. It must have taken imagination when you didn't have any education, but you made sure that your children went to school on time, clean, with everything they needed to make sure that they learned. It must have taken imagination. And if I look at you today, I imagine that some of you are here today, and it must have taken imagination to see your way through some of that stuff that you've gone through in life. Even when everything and everybody around you could not see you coming out of that situation, because God anointed your mind, you were able to see yourself healed. Because God anointed your mind, you were able to see yourself debt-free. Because God anointed your mind, you were able to see yourself whole again. Because God anointed your mind, you were able to see yourself saved and forgiven. It's called imagination. It does not take much imagination, to decide that you'd rather use your body to get where you need to go rather than use your mind to get. Come on, young sisters, and talk to me in the house. It does not take much imagination, sisters and brothers, to think that just because you make a baby, that makes you a father. It does not take much imagination to always go and charge what you think you want without ever considering that you're going to have to pay it back later. It's called imagination. Can I keep going? Check it, sisters and brothers. I would suggest to you that this thing goes deeper, because imagination without creativity and innovation is just a good idea. And God gives us not only the ability to look at life through his lens so that we can see life alternatively to our present realities, but I would suggest to you as well that God gives us a set of sub-gifts, if you will, called creativity and innovation. Innovation really animate our imagination, because you can have it in your mind, but if you never try to make it live, if you never give it hands and feet, then it will remain stuck in your mind. I think I'm on somebody's street right now because you have a lot of good ideas, but you have not put them into play. Well, come on and walk with me. Creativity, sisters and brothers, suggests the ability to bring something new on the scene, something that nobody's ever thought of before. That's what we see happening in the text today. today. Don't forget verse 12. There's a reason I wanted you to see that. For the word says that the people who witnessed the paralytic man standing and walking and carrying his mat said, we've never seen anything like this before. And I came to tell somebody today, dear heart, if you remain divinely connected to the creator of it all, God will use you to bring forth some things that people have never even thought about before. I wish I had one or two in here that would believe me that he who is the creator of it all has not stopped creating, and he who is the creator of it all will use those who are connected to him to bring forth things that will blow your neighbor's mind. At Mark chapter 2, what we see at work in the text is creativity and innovation at its best. Now, ordinarily, when we hear from this text, we like to concentrate on the man who was paralyzed. But I came to tell you today that my focus today is on the four. That's four bad brothers. And when I read the King James Version, there is no sense of gender. So excuse me this morning if I think that there's one or two sisters that had to be in the mix. That's four bad anointed people of God. Check what the record says. It says that Jesus is at home in Capernaum. Capernaum, sisters and brothers, was the central office for Jesus's ministry. And so he is really in a place that is very familiar to him. He's at home. Somebody say at home. You know, at home, it gives you a certain sense of confidence. At home, you have a certain sense of security about yourself. Jesus is at home, and the Bible says that the rumors have started. They're already gossiping about the boy. Ministry just kicking off, and the mouths are already moving. The mouths are moving, sisters and brothers, because in the section before our section, the word says that Jesus touched and healed a leper. Oh, he is really tripping. That boy must be out his mind because nobody touches a leper. A leper, sisters and brothers, is considered unclean. You know, they're the brothers and sisters who hang out on the outskirts of town. And the word says that Jesus touches a leper, and no sooner than the miracle takes place, your cousin them start talking. Come on, let's keep it real. Let's tell the truth and shame the devil. On the one hand, I believe there's one crowd who's talking and they say, now you know that boy didn't have any business touching that man. You know how it is. His mama didn't teach him right. You know that boy, he called himself holy, but he don't even know the law. He doesn't even recognize, doesn't respect the law enough to know that he's not supposed to touch a leper. But on the other hand, there must have been another crowd that said, yeah, he broke the law, but did you see that the leper was healed? Yeah, he went against the grain, but did you see the result of what he did? I brought you all that way, sisters and brothers, just to tell somebody that when you really about something, and when you really doing something, and when you really living for the Lord, people will talk. If you call yourself walking with the Lord and ain't nobody talking about you, then you are not faithful enough. If people are not talking about you, then you're not taking enough risk. If people are not talking about you, then you too passive. If people are not talking about you, then you really not standing up for the Lord. Because the truth of the matter is that every now and then the move of God in your life ought to make somebody so uncomfortable that they got to talk about you. If you can imagine that, if you have creativity and innovation at work in your life, can I tell you today that God will make a way to get around those who ought to be a help, but it turns out they're hindrance? Can I give you 3 or 4 and then be out of your way? Check what the record says. The record says that when they noticed that they could not get in the door, they went to the roof. Did you read that? When they could not get in the door, they took it to the roof. Now, most of the time when I've heard this passage preached, I've been told that you got to elevate yourself. You know how it is. You got to take yourself a little higher to get above the crowd. But Brother Rogers, I don't think that this is as much about elevation as it is about finding another way. You didn't hear me. You didn't hear me. You didn't hear me. It's not so much about being hyper spiritual as much as it is about just finding another way. May I tell you today, baby, that God always has another way. Check what the record says. Rather than becoming discouraged because their first plan didn't work, they decided God to have another way for us to do this. I think I ought to tell somebody today, baby, the vision that God has given you is not faulty. There's nothing wrong with the vision. It's just that God is telling you there's another way. Because there's a way that seemeth right unto man that actually leads to destruction. Are y'all still walking with me? And so they found another way and went to the roof. But the record says they tore up the roof. Now, some years ago, probably in my second or third year here at Elm Grove, I preached from this passage, and I preached from the perspective of the house owner. Because if I'm the house owner, I'm pretty mad that somebody's tore up my roof. But since we're not talking about the house owner, check what happens. The word says that there is an established structure. A structure that people are using and have been using. The established structure is not sufficient and can't help those who are trying to find another way. Is this making sense so far? So what they decide to do is tear down or tear up the established structure, because the established structure is not beneficial for what they're trying to accomplish. The street right now, because you so busy trying to assimilate, trying to get people that don't love you to like you. You so busy jumping through hoops and doing things that you know are not right and not a part of your nature and your character, trying to fit in the established structure. Don't try to fit in, baby. Work through it. Who are willing to tear up the roof. Perhaps the issue in your life and in my life is not that we are out of position. Maybe the issue is we're trying to live within the structure when God is saying tear it up. Can I tell you, baby, there are some structures in your life and in my life, they need to be destroyed. If you have outgrown the structure and it no longer affords you the room to grow into the man or the woman that God intends for you to be, needs to be destroyed. It's getting quiet in here on me. If you in the structure and what they call love is tearing you down, is beating you up, is sending you to the poorhouse, leaving you battered and bruised, you need to tear up the structure. If the structure that you in, they're always telling you to sit down. It don't take all of that. You shouldn't sing that loud. You shouldn't wave your hands. You shouldn't speak in tongues. You shouldn't run around the church. You need to tear up the structure. If the structure that you in wants to bring you to Calvary and take you to the empty tomb, but never let you spend any time at Pentecost. I'm going to say that again. If they want to take you to Calvary and bring you to an empty tomb, but never take you all the way to Pentecost, somebody say tear it up. All right, we have to go. But I think you ought to recognize what's really at work here. Not only did they tear up the roof, but Mother, the record says that they let their friend, the paralytic, down in the presence of Jesus. Now, all the time I've heard this passage preached. I've heard them say, yeah, you got to get them to the foot to the feet of Jesus. I've always heard them say, if you can get your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your friend, your neighbor to the feet of Jesus, then everything will be all right. But may I flip the script on you this morning? What I love about the fact that they lowered their friend down has nothing to do with hyper spirituality, but it has everything to do with finishing what you started. It would have made no sense to go through the trouble to climb up on the roof. Made no sense to tear up the roof without letting their friend down in the presence of Jesus. And God sent me to the house today. Tell somebody that you haven't failed. You just have to finish what you started. What God put in your heart and they talked you out of doing, yes, it's still good for you and it's still good for everybody around you. The Lord said, finish what you started. Every now and then, and I have to make up our minds that in spite of everything that comes against us, in spite of the hindrance that ought to be a help, we ought to use our imagination. Imagine that, yes, and finish what we've started. I just believe there's some degrees that are still on the table, and God told me to tell you, get your butt back in school and finish what you started. I just believe there's some businesses and some ministries that are caught up on a napkin in somebody's junk drawer, and God told me to tell you, go pull that napkin out and work the plan that God gave you. Finish what you started. I got to leave you alone, but the record says that Jesus had an altercation with the church folk, and you know, every now and then when imagination is at work, church folk will get upset, but church folk can't stop the blessings of God. The record says Jesus turns to the man and he says, get up off your bed, roll it up, and walk out of here like a natural man. The man followed the command of Jesus. May I stick a pin right there and remind somebody, your imagination comes from God. Use what the Lord gives you. Follow the command of the Lord. The man walks out and everybody in the house, they are amazed. I just believe there are some miracles in this house today, and everybody's going to look around amazed at what the Lord has done for you. Faith led to creativity and innovation. His faith led to his healing. Jesus used imagination and creativity and innovation. Check what happened. The people are amazed, but they are not amazed to the place that they just gossip, Barbara. They are amazed to the place that they praise the Lord. I'm going to say that again. When they looked around and said, imagine that. The Lord sure is good. Imagine that. He has done great things for me. Imagine that. I once was blind, but now, imagine that. I was sick in my body, but now imagine that. I was broke, but now you need a little change. Imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine that. Imagine that. Is there anybody in here that wants to give God a praise because of what he's doing in your life?